Hello, I'm Scott White, State Senator from the 46th Legislative District in North Seattle. Thanks for watching my latest video update. With just 11 days remaining for the 2011 legislative session, we are working down to the wire to pass a budget that is responsible, sustainable, and, wherever possible, compassionate. Yesterday was the last deadline for policy bills this session, which means that all bills that were not flagged as necessary to implement the budget needed to pass both the House and Senate by 5 p.m. in order to be signed into law this year. With most policy bills off the table now, we will spend our final days in Olympia making extremely difficult decisions about the state's budget for the next two-year cycle and voting on the policy bills necessary for it to be implemented. So today's video update is going to focus on the budget proposals being considered by the House and Senate. Last night, the Senate unveiled its proposed operating budget for the 2011-2013 biennium, which came out about a week after the House released its initial budget proposal. We now have both proposals before us, with the goal of narrowing them down to a single document before we head home for the Easter holiday break on April 24th. The reductions we're proposing to make will be felt throughout state government. We were forced to reduce state services by roughly $4.8 billion, which takes us back to spending levels below what the state spent in 2007. State spending per capita in both budget proposals is at its lowest level since 1986, and that's after adjusting for inflation. As Senator Ed Murray, chair of the Senate Ways and Means Committee, said at the budget press conference last night, quote, "This is not a budget of choice, it is a budget of necessity," end quote. Yet, despite these significant reductions, I believe we were successful in preserving some of the core functions that the state provides. With the reductions we made, we prioritized education, life-saving services, and care for our most vulnerable citizens. I'd like to provide a brief comparison of these House and Senate budget proposals to give you a sense of the choices legislators face and to highlight some of the key similarities and differences between the two proposals. The Senate budget proposed $32.3 billion in spending, which matches the latest state revenue forecast for the coming biennium. The Senate budget proposal also includes $4.8 billion in reductions, which is roughly $322 million more in reductions than the House. Now, the House kept an ending fund balance of $795 million, while the Senate proposed to keep $738 million left in reserves. The House proposal also relies on $300 million in savings by privatizing the distribution of liquor sales in the state and other fund shifts. But in the Senate, we chose not to go this route. Both House and Senate budgets call for an additional 3% reduction in salaries for state employees, including employees at public higher education institutions. The Senate's budget also includes mandatory furlough days for state employees making more than $50,000 a year. This reduction comes on top of a 3% pay cut from last year, mandatory furlough days, and a salary freeze that has been in effect since 2008. About 4% of the total state workforce has already been laid off in the last 2 years, totaling roughly 8,200 full-time positions, with thousands expected to be permanently laid off under these new budget proposals. With regard to teacher salaries, the House proposed freezing salary steps, which would save the state roughly $56 million over 2 years, while the Senate proposes to include K-12 employees in the across-the-board 3% salary reduction for state employees. In K-12 education, both the House and Senate budgets preserve funding for basic education, school district levy equalization, and funding for highly capable or gifted students. Both the House and Senate budgets propose to suspend Initiative 728, which was passed by voters in 2000 to provide additional funding to school districts to reduce class sizes and provide other services. Both budget proposals also call for the elimination of classroom reduction funding for kindergarten through 4th grades. However, partial funding for class size reduction in K-3 high poverty schools is preserved in both proposals. In higher education, the differences between the House and Senate budgets are more obvious. But in both budgets, our public higher education system took one of the largest cuts of all of state government. These cuts were partially mitigated by authorizing annual tuition increases in both the House and Senate budgets. The House budget assumes tuition increases of 13% at the University of Washington, Washington State University, and Western Washington University, with an increase of 11.5% at Eastern, Central, and Evergreen, and 11% within the state's community and technical college system. The Senate budget proposes slightly higher tuition increases of 16% at the UW, Wazoo, and Western, 14% at Central and Evergreen, 11% at Eastern, and 12% increases at the community colleges. To offset the significant tuition increases, both the Senate and House budget proposals call for increasing funding of the State Need Grant. That's the state need-based financial aid program that provides scholarships to low-income students whose family incomes are less than 70% of the state median. The Senate also restored partial funding for the State Work-Study Program and the Worker Retraining Program, neither of which were included in the House budget. In the areas of health care and social services, we did what we could to preserve the essential functions of our social safety net. Eligibility changes to the Children's Health Program are included in both budget proposals. This program serves mostly undocumented children who are not eligible for federally funded programs. In an earlier round of budget reductions, program eligibility was narrowed from serving children whose family income was 300% or less of the federal poverty level to only serving those with family incomes that are 200% or less of the federal poverty level. These changes are continued in the coming budget proposals from both chambers. Both budget proposals also preserve the state's basic health program, which provides low-cost health care coverage for low-income individuals and families who are not eligible for other health care coverage. In recent years, cuts to the program have reduced the total number of enrollees from over 120,000 to 57,000, with an estimated 130,000 people on the waiting list. Eligibility changes in the program have also resulted in an estimated 15,000 individuals losing coverage as well. Both budgets reduced the state's food stamp program by 50%. The Basic Food Assistant Program provides assistance to low-income individuals who do not qualify for the Federal Food Assistant Program. Since federal food assistance programs require that an individual be a permanent U.S. resident for at least 5 years, most individuals eligible for the state-only program are legal residents who have lived in the U.S. for less than 5 years. Personal care hours for senior citizens and those suffering from mental and health disorders were reduced in both budgets as well. These reductions are in addition to reductions taken in earlier budgets and eligibility changes that make SSI beneficiaries ineligible for medical assistance. The House and Senate both proposed to reduce personal care hours by $97.5 million. Reductions are made based on the level of care that is needed. Both budgets preserve medical benefits, including the Disability Lifeline Program, which serves individuals who are temporarily unable to work due to physical or mental disability. However, enrollments are capped at 12,000 in the Senate's proposal. Both proposals eliminate the cash grant in lieu of funding a housing voucher program. The House budgets propose to reduce grants to community health centers by 50%, while the Senate budget proposed to fully eliminate the grants. Community health centers are local, community-owned medical clinics serving low-income and medically underserved populations. Finally, to reduce state spending in the area of natural resources and recreation, the House and Senate proposed to reduce funding for state parks and recreational lands by over $68 million. However, nearly all of those reductions would be offset by the creation of a new universal pass called the Discover Washington Pass that would cost $30 per year per vehicle or $10 a day for use. Pass holders would have access to lands managed by the State Parks and Recreation Commission as well as the State Departments of Natural Resources and Fish and Wildlife. These are just some of the major components contained in the House and Senate budget proposals. As you can see, we have been forced to make heartbreaking and emotionally devastating decisions that will impact every corner of the state. But you have my commitment to work with my legislative colleagues and you, the citizens, to come up with a compassionate budget that we can use to rebuild our state in the coming years. You can find links to more detailed information on these proposals and other up-to-date budget information on my website or on the legislature's fiscal website at www.leap.leg.wa.gov. In closing, I'd like to emphasize that this budget is by no means final. As I record this update, there are many conversations taking place around the Capitol about alternatives to an all-cuts budget, including the possibility of new revenues. However, we are writing this budget knowing that we must continue to have conversations with the public about how state government can be a partner with citizens. Many details still need to be negotiated between the Senate and the House, but in the end, we will have a balanced budget that reduces services. I ask you to continue the dialogue with family members, friends, neighbors, and elected officials about the values and priorities you'd like to see reflected in your government, not just for this budget or this legislative session, but in the months and years to come as we come out of this global recession and engage in the hard work to rebuild critical programs. That's where progress starts, and ultimately, that's how change can be achieved. Thanks so much for watching this update. As always, please contact me with your reactions to these budget proposals or other comments and questions about issues in state government. Thank you, and take care.